For 24 years, she did things the law did not allow, silencing lawyers and ruining their lives until a man flipped the script, shocked her, and arrested her in her own courtroom. The air inside the Jefferson County Courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, was heavy, not from the southern humidity creeping in through the stone walls, but from something denser, something unspoken, a weight that had settled over this place for more than 2 decades. Every lawyer, every defendant, every court official who walked through the towering oak doors knew one thing. This was Marsh Caldwell's domain. She didn't rule with outbursts or dramatic monologues. No, her authority was quieter, sharper, more suffocating. She rarely lifted her eyes above the rim of her reading glasses, yet her gaze could carve through even the most seasoned attorneys like a blade against glass. She had been on the bench for 24 years, and in that time she had built a reputation, not the kind that made it into textbooks or legal conferences, but the kind whispered in cautious voices at bar association meetings, a name spoken in hushed warnings among defense attorneys, especially black attorneys, because in Marsh Caldwell's courtroom, justice did not belong to everyone. It was an unspoken rule, one that needed no documentation, no confession, but anyone who had stood before her knew. The rulings leaned a certain way. The objections she overruled, the cases she dismissed, the sentences she handed down, they all followed a pattern no one could prove. But today, that pattern was about to be tested. Clinton Marsh walked through the courthouse doors, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He had been here before, many times, but today was different. Today, he wasn't just another defense attorney standing before Judge Marsh Caldwell. Today, he had something she didn't see coming. Clinton was 48 years old, but experience had carved deeper lines into his face than time alone ever could. His reputation stretched far beyond Alabama, built on cases no one else wanted. He was the one who took the lost causes, the hopeless fights, the battles no other lawyer dared to touch. And more than once, those fights had put him directly in the crosshairs of people like Marsh Caldwell. But that had never stopped him before. What did stop him just for a second was the look in her eyes when he stepped toward the defense table. She already hated him, not because of the case, not because of the evidence he would present, but simply because he was him. Clinton felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his client, Rory Vaughn. This wasn't just about proving one man's innocence. This was about something far bigger, and he wasn't leaving this courtroom until he made that clear. "Mr. Marsh," Judge Caldwell said, barely glancing at him as she adjusted the stack of papers in front of her, "you're already on thin ice in my courtroom. Don't waste my time today." There was no reason for her to say that. They hadn't even started. Clinton tightened his grip on his briefcase but kept his expression unreadable. "I'll try not to, Your Honor." Marsh smirked, a silent challenge. "Good," she said coolly, "because I have a full docket, and I don't need theatrics." She turned to the prosecution. Nathan Calloway, a young district attorney, barely out of law school, too eager to prove himself to the wrong people. "The state is ready, Your Honor," Calloway said, casting a smug glance toward Clinton. Of course, they were ready. They were always ready when the case was stacked against a black man. Rory Vaughn sat beside Clinton at the defense table, his hands folded, shoulders hunched forward. He was 36 years old, but he looked older, not in the way time aged a man, but in the way a broken system drained the life from him. He had seen too much, heard too much, lost too much. Clinton leaned in slightly. His voice was low but firm. "We're ready too." He said it loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. Marsh Caldwell exhaled through her nose, irritated. "Let's get this over with." But Clinton wasn't here just to get this over with. He was here to end it, to end her. The trial began, but it wasn't a trial, it was a performance. And Marsh Caldwell was the star of the show. From the moment the first argument was presented, her bias dripped from every ruling, every interruption, every dismissive glance she threw in Clinton Marsh's direction. She was not subtle. Every objection Clinton raised, overruled. Every mistake Nathan Calloway, the young prosecutor, made, gently corrected. It was theater, but only one side was allowed to act. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. Even some of the white jurors, who may have entered with their own biases, were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But Marsh didn't care. She had run her courtroom this way for 24 years, and no one had stopped her yet. So why would today be any different? Clinton watched her carefully, the way her lips curled when he spoke, the way she barely concealed her disdain every time he challenged the prosecution. This wasn't just bias. This was something worse. He had been in hostile courtrooms before. He had argued in front of judges who had already made up their minds before the first witness was called. But this was different. She wasn't even trying to hide it. And that was her mistake. "Mr. Marsh," Judge Caldwell said, peering down at him like a school teacher scolding an unruly child. "You're testing my patience." Clinton kept his hands folded on the table. He didn't react, didn't blink. "Mr. Marsh," she continued, her voice cold, measured, "if you raise one more baseless objection, I will hold you in contempt." His blood boiled, not because of the insult. He had been called worse, but because this was personal. She wasn't just trying to silence him. She was trying to make an example of him. Still, he needed her to keep talking, to keep exposing herself. He exhaled slowly. "Your Honor," he said calmly, deliberately, "the prosecution just introduced evidence that was not disclosed in discovery. That is a clear violation of Brady v. Maryland." He let the legal precedent hang in the air, heavy with significance. "I move for an immediate mistrial." The room went still. Judge Caldwell leaned back, adjusting her glasses. Boredom exaggerated. "Denied." Clinton didn't react. Instead, he let the silence stretch. Let everyone in that room absorb what had just happened. Then he spoke again. "To be clear, Your Honor," his voice remained even, controlled, "you are refusing to acknowledge a Brady violation?" Her lips pursed. "I said denied, Mr. Marsh." This time the whisper started. The reporters scribbled faster. Even the jury exchanged uncertain glances. Judge Caldwell saw it too. Her eyes darkened. And for the first time, she looked directly at him. "You are dangerously close to being held in contempt." Clinton tilted his head slightly. "For what, Your Honor?" His voice was calm, unshaken. "Asking the court to follow the law?" She slammed the gavel down so hard the sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. "That's enough." Her voice was sharp, but Clinton heard it. That flicker of uncertainty beneath her fury. She felt it. The room shifting. The control she had always wielded beginning to slip through her fingers. Clinton leaned back, satisfied, because he wasn't here just to win this case. He was here to end her reign, and she had just played right into his hands. The heavy double doors of the courtroom swung open, the sound reverberating through the chamber like a thunderclap. Every head turned. 2 federal agents in dark suits strode inside, their movements crisp, their expressions unreadable. The energy in the room shifted instantly. A silence thick and suffocating settled over the courtroom, the kind that came only before a reckoning. Clinton Marsh remained still, smoothing his tie, his hands folding neatly on the defense table. But he knew this was it, the moment he had been waiting for. Judge Marsh Caldwell's eyes flickered not with anger this time, but with something far more telling. Confusion, then irritation, and just beneath it, a flicker of fear. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice sharp, slicing through the silence. One of the agents, a tall man with an air of absolute authority, stepped forward, flashing his badge. "Judge Marsh Caldwell," he said, his tone leaving no room for interpretation. "We need to speak with you immediately." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Marsh squared her shoulders, her mask of arrogance slipping back into place. "I am in the middle of a trial," she said coolly. "Whatever this is, it will have to wait." The agent did not blink. "It cannot wait." A ripple of whispers spread through the gallery, the bated breaths of reporters, the stunned expressions of the jury. Even Nathan Calloway, the young prosecutor who had thrived under Marsh's protection, looked rattled. Should we take a recess, Your Honor?" he stammered. Marsh's fingers curled against the bench. "No," she snapped. Her voice was too sharp, too desperate. "The defense has wasted enough of this court's time, and I refuse to allow." "The defense," the lead agent cut in smoothly, "is not the issue here." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. A warrant. The room plummeted into silence. Judge Maris Caldwell had spent 24 years ruling this courtroom with an iron grip, and now she was losing control of it all. "We have a warrant for your arrest." A collective gasp rippled through the room. For a split second, everything froze. And then, everything fell apart. Maris went still. The color drained from her face. Her lips parted slightly as if about to object, to argue, to deny. But there was nothing left to say. The lead agent stepped forward, unfolding the document. "Maris Caldwell, you are being arrested under suspicion of bribery, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under federal law." The courtroom exploded. Shock, disbelief, awe. Reporters' pens scratched frantically, capturing history in real time. Bailiffs shifted uncomfortably, uncertain of what to do. The jury sat, frozen, their eyes bouncing between Clinton and the woman on the bench. For the first time in 24 years, Maris Caldwell was no longer the one in control. Clinton stood, slowly, deliberately. He let the weight of the moment settle, let the silence drag, let the full realization of what was happening sink into every corner of the room. Then he turned, first to the jury, then to the gallery, then finally to her. He locked eyes with the woman who had ruled this room like a queen on her throne, and he spoke. "Your Honor," he said, his voice impossibly steady, "I believe you just denied my motion for a mistrial." A beat of silence. Then he tilted his head slightly. "But it seems this trial is now the least of your concerns." The lead agent approached the bench. "Judge," he said, his voice firm but indifferent, "we need you to stand." Maris didn't move. For the first time, she looked at Clinton and truly saw him. Not just another defense attorney, not just another obstacle, but the man who had been waiting for this moment, her reckoning. And then, she stood. The cuffs snapped around her wrists. And the courtroom wasn't just watching, they were witnessing the fall of a tyrant. For a long moment, the courtroom stood frozen. The echoes of the handcuffs clicking shut around Judge Maris Caldwell's wrists still hung in the air, a sharp, unmistakable sound that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the courthouse. Maris, who had spent 24 years ruling this room with absolute control, now stood at the bench, but not as a judge. As a defendant. Her expression was unreadable, but Clinton Marsh saw the truth beneath it. Not fury, not indignation, fear. The gallery burst into whispers, then murmurs, then outright gasps. Even Nathan Calloway, the prosecutor who had once thrived under her protection, looked like he had just witnessed a ghost. Clinton didn't move, didn't react. He had waited too long for this moment to rush it now. Instead, he let it breathe. He let the jury absorb the weight of what had just happened, the confirmation that everything they had seen, everything they had felt during this trial, had been real. Maris Caldwell hadn't just been biased, she had been corrupt, and now she would answer for it. The lead agent took a step forward. "Judge," he said, voice calm but firm, "we need you to come with us." For a split second, she didn't move, as if standing still might somehow keep her world from crumbling. But the world didn't stop for Maris Caldwell anymore. Finally, she took a breath, straightened her back, lifted her chin, and stepped down from the bench. A bailiff, one of her own court officers, moved toward the door, holding it open for her. Not as an act of respect, but because she was just another defendant now. Maris hesitated just for a moment, then walked through the door, and just like that, she was gone. A new silence settled over the courtroom, one that felt different, lighter, freer. The weight that had lingered in this space for decades had lifted, but there was still one more thing left to do. Clinton turned, facing the new judge, an older man with silvering hair and an air of quiet authority. "Your Honor," Clinton said, his voice even, controlled, "given recent developments, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." The judge considered him for a long moment, then nodded. "I agree," he said. A beat. Then, "The charges against Rory Vaughn are dismissed." "Bailiff, remove his restraints." For a second, no one moved. Then the metal clink of handcuffs being unlocked shattered the quiet. Rory Vaughn let out a breath, one he had been holding for years. His wrists were finally his own again. His freedom was his again. He turned to Clinton, his voice low, thick with disbelief. "I don't even know what to say." Clinton rested a firm hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to say anything." Because today, the system had actually worked, not because it was built that way, but because someone had fought to make it happen. Rory stood. He turned, scanning the courtroom, the same room that had nearly swallowed him whole. Then, without another word, he walked out, and Clinton followed. Because this wasn't just about Rory Vaughn. This was about every man Marsh Caldwell had condemned, every wrongful sentence she had handed down, every bribe she had taken, every life she had destroyed. This was just the beginning, because there were more Marsh Caldwells out there. And Clinton Marsh? He wasn't done yet. The courthouse doors swung shut behind them, but Clinton Marsh knew this wasn't the end. Not for him, not for the people who had suffered under Marsh Caldwell's rule. The weight of the moment still clung to the air, the kind of weight that lingered long after the dust settled. But Clinton didn't let himself exhale. Because justice wasn't just about one trial. Justice was about what came next. Rory Vaughn walked beside him, silent, processing. The man had spent months, years, trapped in a system designed to bury him. Now he was free. But at what cost? They stopped just outside the courthouse steps. The sky was a strange shade of blue, too bright, too clear, like the world was oblivious to what had just happened inside those walls. Rory turned to Clinton, uncertainty flickering in his expression. "So, what now?" Clinton let the question hang between them. Then finally he spoke. "Now?" His voice was calm, steady, determined. "Now we make sure this never happens again." Behind them, the press was already swarming, cameras flashing, reporters pushing forward, hungry for a statement. They had just witnessed something historic. A judge, one of the most powerful in the state, arrested in her own courtroom. A man wrongfully accused set free. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a reckoning. Clinton turned slightly, just enough to meet the eyes of a young journalist at the front of the crowd. She didn't have to ask the question. He could already hear it in her expression. Was this justice? And he already knew the answer. Number not yet. "Mr. Marsh," someone called out, a microphone shoved forward. "What does this mean for other cases Judge Caldwell ruled on?" Clinton looked past the flashing lights, past the sea of expectant faces. He thought of the hundreds, maybe thousands of names buried in court records. People who never got a fair trial, people who weren't as lucky as Rory Vaughn, people who were still waiting for justice. He exhaled, and then he said, loud enough for every camera, every recorder, every watching eye to hear, "This is just the beginning." Because it had to be. The fight wasn't over. There were still cases to reopen, sentences to challenge, names to clear. Marsh Caldwell may have fallen today, but she was never the only one. There were more like her, and Clinton Marsh? He was coming for them next. As the questions kept coming, Rory Vaughn stepped back, letting the chaos swirl around Clinton. His hands were still free, for the first time in years, and when he looked up at the sky, it didn't feel so suffocating anymore. Maybe this was what hope felt like. Not a miracle, not a guarantee, but a chance. A chance to finally be seen. Clinton turned away from the cameras. There was work to do. And he wasn't stopping now. Not today. Not ever. Because justice wasn't just about winning one battle. It was about the war. And he wasn't done fighting yet. Justice is not automatic. It requires those willing to challenge corruption and fight for the unheard. In today's world, power is often abused in ways that go unchecked. And many suffer not because they are guilty, but because the system is broken. This story reflects the ongoing struggles for equality, accountability, and fair treatment, whether in the legal system, workplaces, or society as a whole. It reminds us that one victory is not enough. Real change requires persistence. The fight for justice doesn't end with exposing one corrupt figure. It continues until fairness is the standard, not the exception.